It was a night I'll never forget. I was tasked with the responsibility of being the designated driver for my group of friends, Michael, Eddie, and Daniela. We lived in the countryside, and anytime we wanted to go out to party or hit the bars, we had to embark on a long journey. So, being the designated driver was a big deal. It meant someone had to remain sober enough to get us home safely. Little did I know, what was about to unfold would test my courage and challenge everything I thought I knew. We were driving down a dark and lonely road, the 513. The road was surrounded by forests and only a few houses here and there. We were on our way back from a party in town, and Daniela suddenly started to cry, saying she needed to go to the bathroom really bad. I told her to hold it just a little longer, but then I started to feel the urge too. With Daniela's drunken screams, I decided to pull over to the side of the road and let her go in the woods. Daniela stepped out of the car and vanished into the crops on one side of the road. I took a deep breath and made my way to the other side of the road and deep into the woods. I needed privacy while I relieved myself. I quickly finished and hurried back to the car. Eddie and Michael were belting out the lyrics to the loud music on the radio. Meanwhile, I sat in silence, feeling more and more anxious with each passing moment. My two drunk friends didn't seem to find anything strange about the fact that Daniela had now been gone for 5 minutes. So I got back out to call her name. Michael has a much stronger voice than I, so when he screamed for her, it would be impossible for her not to hear. But still, she didn't call back. I didn't want to go in those crops, but I kind of felt like I had to since she's my friend and I was the most aware at that moment. I forced Michael to come with me since I was afraid to go in alone. Eddie stayed in the car. He was just too far gone at this point. With the flashlight from my glove box, Michael and I pushed our way through the thick, overgrown crops, walking in the only direction we could think to go straight away from the car. Michael was calling Daniela's name while laughing his ass off. I can understand why he was finding it funny in his condition, but I just wanted to make sure she was all right and get home. Over the sounds of her own footsteps brushing crops aside and Michael's laughter, I heard something else in the near vicinity. I put my arm out to Michael's chest to halt him. Now, all that could be heard was the night breeze blowing through the crops. "What is it?" I whispered, to which Michael responded. "Shh." He called out Daniela's name again. I joined in, figuring it was just her trying to sneak up on us and scare us. And again, the footsteps stopped. So we walked a little deeper into the crops. That's when we came to a narrow clearing stretch. I don't know much about crops and farming or anything, but it seemed to be some little stretch for people to walk through. It was probably the width of 2 people, just enough to walk through. I looked to my left as far down as the light would let me see, and then to the right. I could hear 3 footsteps and then a couple of crops pushed outward into the opening as somebody stepped into view. At first, my light was only revealing their legs. So by default, given the circumstances, I assumed it was Michael. However, the light revealed it to be not Michael, but instead some random man who I'd never seen before. His facial features weren't clear enough to give a good description, but he didn't look friendly. I ran for it back in the only direction I remembered coming from. I guess I ran so fast that it only took me about 10 seconds to make it back to the car. He was passed out in the car at this point, so I didn't bother trying to get help from him. I was honking the horn again, hoping to get Michael's and hopefully Daniela's attention. The sight of that man just disturbed me. I didn't know if he owned this land or not. I continued to honk the horn until finally, Michael came out of the crops dragging Daniela, who seemed to be out cold. I got out to help him lift her back inside of the car and plop her on the seat. Michael pointed out the gash on her forehead as if she had been struck with a heavy, sharp object. Michael seemed to be sobering up pretty quickly due to the situation. He advised me to drive to the nearest hospital, which was 10 minutes away. The drive there was not fun. It was full of panic and yelling. We brought Daniela in to have her wound treated as soon as possible. It was only then that Michael explained to the nurses, not me, that he saw some guy dragging her collapsed, unconscious body before fleeing deeper into the crops. After noticing him, he never mentioned that in the car, but it made perfect sense now. That man in the crops with us that night did this. Daniela was awake after she got all stitched up, and she had no recollection of the entire night from the moment we stepped into the party to the moment she got struck in the head. As I glanced at the glowing green clock on my car's dashboard, I was hit with a sense of unease. The time read 12:17, and the memory of that number still haunts me to this day. I was making my way home from a grueling night shift at the pharmacy, navigating the deserted highway in the dead of night. The road was notorious for its dangers. The absence of streetlights and other vehicles only added to the risk. The area was known for wild deer that would sometimes venture onto the road, causing a deadly collision for unsuspecting drivers. I always drove cautiously, never exceeding 50 mph, always alert for any signs of danger. As the road curved to the left, a clear row of reflective lights appeared on the horizon. I quickly realized it was the reflective tape of a row of traffic cones, as well as a flashing blue light in the distance in front of them. It seemed to be the reflective material on a safety vest. I was so confused trying to figure out what was happening that I didn't even realize I should be slamming on the brakes until it was almost too late. The car came to a halt with the screeching of my tires. The man wearing the reflective vest started walking over to my car with his arms out and waving. I assumed he was telling me not to move the car. As the man got closer, I could see what appeared to be a police uniform under the vest. He knocked on my window with the joint of his pointer finger, so I rolled down the window to reveal the man's face. He was black, about 6 feet tall, skinny with a slight stubble and a left earring. I guessed he was around 25. He spoke in a very low, non-commanding voice, especially for an officer. He said, "License and registration, please." I paused for a second and asked if I had done something wrong since I definitely wasn't speeding. He paused as well, looked slightly to the left, and then back at me. "Sir, this is a sobriety checkpoint," he said in a non-commanding voice once again. I asked why he needed my ID and registration if I hadn't been suspected of anything. He leaned back from my car and asked me to step out of the vehicle to begin a test. I opened my door and stepped out. Immediately, I noticed the cop was taller than me. He took a roll of tape out from his vest pocket and leaned down to the ground, stretching it to a length of about 15 feet. He told me to step on the end of the roll of tape and place my arms out to my sides as I walked across the tape in a straight line. I easily did it with no issues, with the cop directly behind me the whole time, uncomfortably close. When I got to the end of the roll of tape, I could more easily see the blue flashing light. It wasn't on top of a police car. It was on an older, small sedan. I looked back at the man and asked to see his badge. He just looked at me with a blank stare. It started to sink in, and I literally mean that because I felt like my heart was sinking. This guy wasn't a cop. I couldn't quite distinguish what he said next, but as he got to his car, I assumed he said, "I'll go get it." When he was bent over in his car grabbing something, I ran back to my car and started the engine. He looked at me as I put the pedal to the floor and the car accelerated through the traffic cones. I saw the headlights of the guy's car go on as I was a few hundred feet away. But by that point, I was already going over 60, and there was no way he'd catch me. I got off at the next exit, and as soon as there were streetlights around, I turned off my car lights to draw less attention as I finished the drive to my house. I only wish I had a dash cam at the time so I could have gotten it on video. I swear it would have wound up on the news. I was taking a drive from Maine to Upper New York to spend the week with family. I left right after work around 5, so I didn't anticipate getting there past 1 in the morning. I had the top of my Jeep Wrangler off so I could enjoy the hot weather. I was somewhere in Vermont well past midnight when the gas light flicked on and the car started beeping. Unfortunately, the gas gauge in the car was broken, so there was no way to gauge how much gas was left. I was told by my brother, who drove the car the previous day, that he filled it up to the top, but clearly he was either mistaken or lying because I hadn't used anywhere near a full tank's worth of gas. One of those blue service signs zoomed past and I could see a gas station symbol in one of the boxes. So I turned off that exit onto a desolate road, which surely led to some kind of civilization. I wouldn't be finding out anytime soon, however, because the car started jittering and bumping around a bit, making weird noises that didn't sound good at all. A few seconds later, the acceleration stopped and the car came to a helpless halt. I couldn't believe it, but I actually ran out of gas. I hopped out of the car and got on the phone with AAA, telling them my exact location. They said they could have a guy out to me in at least 20 minutes. I was grateful, but at the same time annoyed that I'd be waiting. For about 15 minutes, I kind of just strolled around my car slowly, looking down at my phone. texting friends about the situation and checking social media. It was so quiet. No sounds of distant traffic, no passing cars, just the sound of crickets and other night creatures in the wood. Then, I heard something walking around in the woods. The footsteps were decently heavy, so I had a hunch it was a deer or something, but the possibility of it being a bear wasn't far-fetched given that this was bear country. I walked around to the passenger side of the car where the woods were and where the sounds were coming from, just in hopes of seeing a deer or some other harmless animal. Then there were two clapping sounds, like someone was actually clapping their hands. I moved a little closer to listen for it again, and this time there were three claps. I called out to the woods, hoping in some weird way that someone would answer. But after I did, the clapping didn't happen anymore. I just stood there waiting for something to happen, but it was just silence. So I got back in the car and just waited. I heard footsteps once again coming from the woods, coming in my direction. Then it just stopped. I looked outside and saw a head peeking from behind a tree just ahead. It almost looked lifeless, and the eyes just looked so lifeless. I couldn't even tell if they were looking at me or not. I was so focused on these details that I didn't even think to scream at the horror of what I was witnessing. I cranked the windows up on both sides and turned off the headlights. However, hiding in the car didn't make me feel much safer since the entire top was off. Without the headlights on, there was complete darkness, and I couldn't see 2 inches in front of me. Yet I was surrounded by the night noises of the forest. I was ducking down below the dashboard. The doors were locked, yet I was still completely exposed to the outside. I was praying not to hear any sudden sounds like footsteps. I felt a sinking feeling in my stomach as I heard someone grab the car door handle. I tried my best not to move or make any noise. I was waiting for someone to start pounding at the glass, or at the very least reach around the opening behind the front door to just unlock it. I was so exposed it wasn't even funny. And then I felt a hand aggressively grab onto my back. I simply lost it and screamed at the top of my lungs. But suddenly, the hand released its grip on my shirt as light began to fill the area, and the sound of a truck engine pulling up the road was music to my ears. I sat up and turned around to see the headlights of a AAA truck. But whoever was grabbing me was long gone already. I ran outside to greet the man who stepped out. He was a big dude in his 40s. I basically cried to him about what just happened, taking huge breaths in between each sentence. Something about his personality and presence was just calming and reassuring. However, he filled my car up with gas, and we both went on our way. Even though something about that man's aura just calmed me down. The memory of what happened that night is still haunting, and the image of that lifeless head peering around that tree is imprinted in my brain. So that's it for today. Make sure to like and subscribe so your name is not written on the horror note.